More than any other time in the past, we need to connect ourselves and children with nature and the environment. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and I'm an environmental educator who wants to connect all of you with a bit of inspiration. In each episode of the Nature Talks podcast, I'll talk to incredible educators, scientists, thinkers, and innovators who are connecting those around them to nature and the outdoors and inspiring new generations of environmental stewards. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 14 of the Nature Talks podcast, the environmental education podcast. My name's Kevin. I'm a Canadian teacher, an international school educator, an environmental educator, a primary years program educator who is based in Shenzhen, China. I'm a Canadian, and my passions in life involve connecting young people with nature, with the outdoors, with sustainability, and connecting educators with this movement as well. And I want to welcome you all to episode 14. I've been very excited to see the response I've had so far with the past 3 episodes of the new season. We were fortunate enough to have Kenny Peavy, Isaac Cohen, and of course, most recently, Nate Swick come on the podcast to talk about a lot of very important issues, and we had some very great conversations. And again, I'm very happy for all of you out there who are listening to the podcast. And we've got another great episode coming your way after a week off. I figure the way I'm going to do this is about 3 episodes a month, 3 episodes in a row. I take a week off. We call that a dark week, just for me to have a little bit more time to gather myself, to get all the ducks lined up in a row, so to speak, and to come out with another episode. In the week off, between episode 13 and this one, I was able to have a couple of fantastic interviews for future episodes, and that was very productive and very awesome. Now, I am a big fan of gardening. Gardening is something I've done on my own when I was single, as a married man, as a family man. Gardening has been something I've always loved doing, and the thing that I'm most passionate about is growing food. It kind of began with showing my own 2 children, my son and my daughter, where food comes from and connecting them with food. And I have fantastic memories of my years living in Kobe, Japan, where my son was going to Japanese yochien, Japanese kindergarten, and for his little bento box, his lunch box, he would go out each morning during the season to our balcony and harvest his own tomatoes. When he was 3 years old, he would go out with a little pair of scissors and clip the tomatoes that he wanted, that he felt were the best looking for his lunch that day, and he would bring them into the kitchen and wash them in the sink and then give them to his mother to put in his bento box. And it kind of started from there. And I've always felt that gardening is a very important part of every classroom existence. So I'm always growing in my classroom, literally in my classroom, on the windowsills. I'm growing outside of my classroom, and I don't wait for a unit of inquiry or a science unit about it. I'm just doing it all year long because I want kids to see the process, to feel comfortable and happy around plants, and again, to know where that food comes from. And you know what? While searching for guests, I came across an amazing one, a very inspirational young educator in the States, Taylor Murphy, and I'm very happy that she agreed to come on this week's episode of the podcast to talk to you about the power of school gardening and the incredible things she's doing at West Portal Elementary School in San Francisco. And I'm really going to push you guys out there to go and follow West Portal Elementary School's garden on Twitter afterwards. I'll share more information. But you know what? Let's just jump into this week's episode of the Nature Talks podcast with an inspiring talk about school gardening with a full-time school gardener, Taylor Murphy. Okay, folks, this afternoon or this evening, whenever you're listening to this, I'm very happy to welcome to the Nature Talks podcast, Taylor Murphy, who is coming to us from San Francisco. Taylor, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. And the theme of this podcast, this episode, is all about gardening in schools. And I'm sure it's a theme that's going to continue in the future in other podcasts. But gardening in schools and the amazing things that we can do to connect children with the natural world, even in an urban environment through gardening. So and I just want to share with you, Taylor, before we get started. I came across you by accident, actually, on Twitter by doing like research into gardens in schools, school gardens, and I came across the West Portal Elementary School Twitter feed, which is quite small, but I came across it somehow, and I started going through it, and just the pictures I found and the projects that are going on there just got me. I'm like, I wrote that down, like, contact whoever these people are. And these people are you. So Taylor, Taylor, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself to the listeners and just, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you found yourself, I guess, where you currently are as an educator.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, my name is Taylor. Hi. And I am the garden science teacher at West Portal Elementary School, which is located in San Francisco. Yes, it's a garden program that serves kids. Well, last year and previous years, it was grades K through 5, but in this upcoming year, we are now going to have TK at our school. So yes, I will be a garden science teacher for students TK through 5, which is very exciting.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. That is exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I just finished my first year teaching at this school. I'm about to start my second year of teaching here in like a week or two. It's coming up fast, and I'm very excited about it.
It is. Oh, that's fantastic. So now, I guess, I've got a whole bunch of questions and different things I want to ask you. But, leading into, so you're a garden science teacher, which is fantastic because I've never heard of this position before. And I'm extremely jealous. I'll just say that right now. I'm going to be like, with full honesty, I'm extremely jealous because those who follow me on social media and this and that know that like urban gardening is one of my passions. Once upon a time, I did grow up in rural Canada. And just gardening was my thing because, I came from a family of gardeners. But we had a house with a big yard and a big backyard and all that kind of stuff. But for the last 20 years, it's been balconies for me. But, we do what we can. So, you have this position, you're a garden science teacher. So I'm wondering, were you always a gardener? Was this something that you had a history of or that you kind of accidentally fell into?
I absolutely did not have a garden background in my childhood and upbringing. This is something I'm so excited about now, but my friends are like, wait, you're doing what? You're a garden science teacher? How did this come to be? So no, my childhood gardening was, helping mom pull weeds in the garden for $1. And I think most people have at some point in their life. Yep. Yeah. And, I loved outdoor activities, but I never really had this garden connection. My garden connection actually started in 2019 in Cambodia, of all places. I was living in Thailand for a little while. I moved out there in 2017 and I was working as an English teacher in some of the schools out there. And I had to do a visa run, meaning that you have to leave the country to go get your new visa to be able to come back in. And I thought, okay, if I have to leave, let me go do something for like a month or two and spend some time in the place that I have to go. And I said, okay, I'll go to Cambodia. It was nearby. And I found an opportunity through Workaway. It's a volunteer opportunity on a farm in Cambodia.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, because I was like, I want to do something outside. I love physical work. And I love food. So I was like, I want to do something outside. I want to know more about where our food is coming from. It was just time to completely switch up what I was doing, which was teaching English. And so I found this opportunity. And not only was this a farm, but it was a farm where all the funds that were raised by the farm, with the food that they sold, went directly into providing education for the local village kids.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's incredible. The Red Road Foundation, they are incredible. They have like a little schoolhouse on site built after like an Earthship model. So it's all built, with like tires and plastic bottles and glass and clay and all that stuff. And being there just lit me up. Like something just went off and I said, this is it. I love not only being, in the garden, understanding the food, but also having the connection with the kids, because every day when you're out there with them, I had a 4-year-old kid holding a machete and showing me how to chop the banana tree with it to feed the cow.
Wow.
And just something about that experience, I just said, this is it. And so I actually stayed there for 2 months. And then I went back to Thailand and I found a permaculture course and went and completed that. Absolutely just again fell in love with it. And then I was part of a volunteer community garden down on one of the islands in Thailand for a while. And it's just, everything was just all about gardening and outdoors. And I was still teaching English online. And then I got a call from a friend. This was during pandemic.
Yeah.
And she said, hey, there's this position in San Francisco that's opening up. It's a garden science teacher position. She's like, it kind of combines everything that you're doing right now.
Yeah.
But, wink, wink, it's back in San Francisco, come home. And I was not planning on returning to the US, but I knew that something needed to move around, do something. And so I interviewed for this position. And when I found out about it, it was just like, wow, this is amazing. It's at a school that has not only a garden program, but just a whole community that supports it. And I fell in love with it. So all of a sudden I went from being in Thailand to being back home in San Francisco, which is where I was born and raised. And now I'm a garden science teacher.
Wow, that's quite a journey. That's exciting. And it's really amazing how people find themselves in in the roles that they're in. I'm sure like in 2018 or so, when you were kind of like mulling the idea of going overseas to teach English or so, or 2000, you said when did you head over? 2017?
Yeah, 2017 is when I moved over.
So maybe 2016, when you're like, yeah, maybe it'd be cool to take a gap year or take a year to go and see what it's like to teach abroad. And now here you are, right? I bet you never would have imagined that.
No, not at all. I set off not knowing where I was going to end up. I just said, let's see where the world takes me. And it took me on an amazing journey.
And that's the incredible thing that so many of the people I meet on this podcast, other ones I've done, is these journeys. I mean, I myself was an IT developer. I worked in the game design industry as a 3D artist, and I took a gap year to teach English in Korea 21 years ago. And, in between, I then a few years later ended up going back to university and getting my teaching certification and license. And, now I'm an international teacher talking to you in Shenzhen, China. You're in San Francisco and we're talking about gardening. So it's a weird world. But here we are. And it's really interesting what you're doing. It just popped in my mind. I'm just going to share it out and I'm going to send you this link afterward. But there is a gardening program in New York City called the Bronx Green Machine that immediately I think of when I think of this. And there's a guy named Steven Ritzer who started it, and he's really an inspiring individual. And there's a fantastic TV show called Growing a Greener World. And I'm going to send you a link to an episode with Joe Lamp'l as the host. I don't know if you know this show, but it's a great show. I love his podcast, his gardening podcast, Gardening with the Joe Lamp'l show, the Joe Gardener, it's called. And he interviews this guy. It's so the Growing a Greener World, the Bronx Green Machine. Watch that when we're done. Have a box of tissues with you and say, and watch it, because this will really fire you up even more for your upcoming school year when you see the power of gardens and what they can do with school children. But let's get back into what you're doing, because you're on the ground doing it. You're on the ground doing it. Now, I was wondering if you could tell us then a little bit about how gardening fits in at West Portal Elementary School. How is it used? Tell us about this program.
So it's a huge part of what makes West Portal Elementary what it is. We are lucky enough to have some amazing extracurricular programs that are actually provided by the community's fundraising. So I am not a traditional teacher through the district. The West Portal, current community and alumni, they put on fundraisers throughout the year, and they fundraise for this position, for this garden program.
Oh, wow.
It's really incredible. And so they said, okay, we want to have a garden program at the school, and garden is an extracurricular class that the kids have. Every kid in the school gets to experience garden class, and they will come to garden class once a week for a semester. so half of the school year.
Okay.
And, just like they also will go to world music for the other semester, and garden is what they get to do for that other semester. And it's, an extra class that they get to come to. They also have this garden space that teachers are available to use throughout the entire school year. And then I also put on like a garden recess club that the kids can join, where it's up to the kids to sign up. They can come once a week and spend their lunchtime out in the garden with me doing a variety of things. It's used in all sorts of ways. It's an extra class. It's an opportunity for teachers to supplement what they're doing. We've got garden recess club. We have community garden care days as well. So it's not even just for the kids. I get the parents and the community involved in it as well.
Oh, wow. So it's a real community thing, a community building thing. That's really fantastic. Again, like I said, I've never worked in a place or even heard of this kind of thing in public schools. I mean, I think typically, and it's a theme that does come up in this podcast and in conversations I have outside of school with educators about how often, school gardens tend to be a passion project of a teacher. And, it's a teacher who starts out of school, who's really enthusiastic, if it's a public school or a private school. And they often, spend a lot of time and energy into putting these programs together. But, a theme that comes up is if you don't have administrative support, sometimes it can be a lame duck. And then sometimes these educators can do great things, but then they move on. And then everything kind of stops because it was really their baby, so to speak. But it's really cool hearing that this is a program that's school, community, parents, all these people involved. So I'm curious, how does it work for you? As a school year, as you're planning for this new school year to start up, do you just have I guess we'll just start off by asking about the spaces. What kind of spaces are you working with? I've seen the photos. I know it's more than like a planter, So can you tell us a little bit about about the basic infrastructure? Because I'm sure there's people out there listening who are wondering, thinking to themselves, I would love to start a garden program at my school, or I would like to improve what we have already. So what do you have there?
We are lucky enough to have a fantastic garden space. We have 8 garden spaces.
Wow.
Yeah, eight. And that is not 8 planter boxes. That is like 8 whole garden spaces.
That's amazing.
So yes, in true San Francisco form, our school is on a hill.
Yes, of course, it should be.
Yes, absolutely. You wouldn't be in San Francisco otherwise.
Yeah.
And so our school is it's like on different levels. So on this top level, we have our outdoor classroom, which is more of like a brick floor courtyard type space. That's where I have my red barn shed. That is my office. And
I saw that shed. I saw that in a photo. I think it's got little flags on along the top of it.
Yeah, it does. It's what you picture, your classic red barn shed. And I have a whiteboard on the side of that, and some benches and some tree stumps where the kids sit in front of. That's where I teach majority of the lessons.
Okay, yeah.
So that's where we have that area. And that area has our greenhouse. It has lots of little planter boxes. It has our vermicomposting bin. It has our regular compost tumbler. And that's just our courtyard space. Then we have an orchard with lots of different fruit trees. Wow. We have a native plant garden, which highlights all of the California native plants. We have a succulent garden. We have what we call our peace garden, which is lots of flowers. Mm-hmm. We have 2 different zones of large planter boxes where we grow most of the edibles.
Okay.
Lots of strawberries and snap peas. They grow so well in San Francisco.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And then we have also what we call our bird and butterfly garden, which is lots of trees and flowers and things to bring on the birds and butterflies, and also where the ladybugs absolutely love.
Nice. So ladybugs are the gardener's friend because
absolutely.
Aphids are not. So I love ladybugs. I deal with an extreme amount of aphids where I am and a complete lack of ladybugs as I'm on a 10th floor gardening. Wow. So, I've seen photos, and I'm going to say to anyone out there, and I'll share this in the show notes, all you fine folks listening, but go check out the West Portal Elementary School the gardening Twitter feed, because there's a lot of things in that feed you're going to see. And it did intrigue me or caught my attention when I saw the red barns and I saw the tree stumps, and I immediately thought of outdoor learning spaces. And that's a topic that comes up a lot when we do discuss outdoor learning. In a recent episode of the podcast, we talked to Kenny Peavy, who is at Green School Bali. And they're famous and renowned for the innovative stuff they're doing with outdoor learning at that school. That's kind of the bucket list dream of most outdoor educators, right? I mean, you're shaking your head.
Absolutely.
You know of this place, right? You've lived in the region, right? And
I was so close to it. I absolutely know it. I even listened to that episode today.
Nice. Well, and I know that's the kind of place where people travel pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. People will travel from around the world to see that place and to learn the lessons and how they can transfer that to where they are, hopefully. But yeah, I see those photos and right away I think of like the kind of outdoor classroom space. And I can imagine that you're doing so many different types of things there. So I assume, you said you're teaching the majority of your lessons. You've got like your stumps, your benches, your whiteboard. So I obviously from TK up to grade 5, those lessons are going to be very different. And I can assume that with the older students, you're doing a fair amount of science and actually talking to them about the science behind growing, right?
Yeah, actually with all the grade levels I do. So it's up to me to come up with the curriculum for my classes. Yeah. So, which is exciting. It's great because I can not only teach the kids, okay, here's how to grow a snap pea, but I can also change my lessons to adapt to what they're learning in the classroom. So I meet with all of the grade level teachers and I sit down with them and I say, hey, what are your science units? What are your math units? What are even your art units? Like, what are you teaching in the classroom and how can I supplement that outside? So, kids are looking through their textbook about how to grow a seed, and they might do a little experiment that sits on the windowsill in the classroom, which is awesome. They get that hands-on. But then we take it one step further. And now that their little radish seed has sprouted, I'm like, let's go plant that out in the garden. And we did that with kindergartners. We planted their little radish seedlings out in the garden. And then a month later, they were finished and we ate radishes together.
Yeah, nice. That's awesome. And that's the thing. Like, number one, radishes are great for little kids because they grow fast, right?
Yes.
And when you're really impatient, you need things. That's one thing over the years I've talked to to teachers about. Like when you're because I teach kindergarten. Like when you're growing things with kids, don't use herbs. I mean, herbs are great, but if you're growing something from a seed, don't make it an herb because it will take forever. Like peas, beans, radishes. Those are like the kind of my go-tos anyway. Even tomatoes, like again, teachers often don't realize it takes a long time for a tomato plant to grow and fruit. But yeah, so wow, that's so cool. You're designing your own program, to adapt to the children to complement what teachers are teaching. So what are kind of, I'm sure you've had these conversations with admin people, with those maybe in the community, other teachers. What are the kind of bigger picture things that you're hoping to kind of instill in the children you work with? The whole reason I started this podcast, I often talk about, is that there's a need for voices like yours to be heard by educators, by administrators, by parents out there. So what is a kind of bigger picture behind this garden project?
Yeah, right now I'm really focused on the curriculum side of it because we already do have such a large space to work with, although there's always room for more plants. So, we have such a good foundational space that big picture is really working on the curriculum. The previous teacher who actually founded our garden program and was running it for, I want to say 12 years. Oh, wow. Okay. She just retired and she handed off some of her lessons to me. And so I'm going through them and also tying in like my permaculture background and also adjusting to what the kids are currently learning. Cause like their science units just changed. So I want to make sure that I'm boosting their science lessons as much as I possibly can out in the garden. And, also just keeping with the current times. And I want to teach the kids not only, what does it mean to be sustainable, but what does regenerative farming look like? But even though they're so young, and I know it's a big word, but they grasp onto it so fast. And so, yeah, big picture is really just, for myself, also just becoming as best of an educator as I can, and just really trying to give these kids the best outdoor experience possible. We're in a city. A lot of these kids don't have access to outdoor spaces if they live in apartments or something like that. So it's getting them as much time outside as possible, which I know is especially important after pandemic. And also, big picture goals are connecting to the other gardens and our community gardens and farms and other things that are in our neighborhood. So the kids understand that what we're learning doesn't just apply here at our school. Like, this is, part of the whole community, part of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. There's such a social piece to it too. That's so important. I think that's one of the things that we find ourselves when those of us who are middle-aged like me lament. We talk about how once upon a time the world was more social and connected, communities were more connected. But I think we definitely are in a way now with technology. Here we are talking across the world about this important topic. But I think with gardening, there's such a fantastic social element that there can be to it. So many people, so much joy, conversations, laughing, food parties. And it's interesting. I want to kind of jump back for a moment just for, I would like you to, if you could quickly explain a couple of terms that maybe some of our listeners aren't aware of. You talk about your background in permaculture. What does that mean? What is permaculture in a nutshell?
Oh my gosh, that's $1 million question.
For a layman.
It is a way of looking at gardening and really a whole system and cycle that connects together. So, it's not about just planting a seed. It's, well, what plant can you also put next to that helps it out? And instead of just watering from the hose, what if we caught the rainwater? And that becomes, it feeds the plant instead of us having to put in effort. It's how can we make, nature work together? And we actually do have a rainwater catchment system at our school, which is exciting. It's more of a cycle way of thinking about the garden.
Yeah. There's a really interesting kind of philosophy when it comes to like systems thinking. So you can really even very analytically look at how does nature work. It is a system, and there's all of these different pieces, right, that fit together: the insects, the birds, and how those plants support that. And it's really neat. And another one, vermiculture. Now I know what this one is. This one's a fun one for me. But what for a lot of them out there, what is vermiculture?
It is worms. Squiggly, wiggly, not so slimy, wonderful worms. Yes, the best helpers in the garden, aside from students, because they just work all day and all night. It's great. I teach the kids about what food scraps you can feed to the worms and why they're so beneficial for the garden, and they all know right away. I mean, before I even start the worm lesson, I'm like, why do we think worms are important? They're like, they poop and the poop is good for the garden.
Nice.
Yes. Now let's learn more about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you basically have like a large bin filled with the worms, and they basically produce a form of compost, right?
Yeah, exactly. We have, like a 4 foot by 8 foot.
Oh, wow. That's big
box. Yeah, it's huge. We've got a lot of worms in there. We do have a worm bin where, the students will put food scraps in there and they'll feel the worm castings, which is the fancy name for the worm poop. And it's funny. They all think it's going to smell, but I make all of them do a little sniff and they're like, oh, it just smells like soil.
Yeah. Right. That's cool.
Yeah.
I used to love finding worm castings in certain areas on the schoolyard, like in the different gardens around school where the dry worm castings are all on top of the ground and you can see them all, especially after a rain or whatever. And I'm like, guys, pick that up. What is that? Pick that up. Oh, it's dirt, Mr. O'Shea. I'm like, no, it's not. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, that's worm poop. Lots of laughter. And then a little bit of a fun conversation happens. But
it's such a cool thing to have at the school too, because, a lot of kids, they maybe just think, oh, let's touch a worm. And their first reaction is, ew, gross, because that's what they're used to seeing on TV or the internet is that, spiders and worms and all these things are scary and they don't have much exposure to it.
Yeah.
But now you put it in their hand and they're used to being around it and they're not so scared of it anymore. I mean, exactly. I've seen a student change their mind in 5 minutes, someone who was running the other way from worms, who then was like, okay, let me see if I'm okay with this. And they let it be put in their hand. And it's just this exposure for these kids, which is just so important. I mean, kids and adults alike, we tend to be afraid of the things we're not exposed to.
Well, we learn from our parents and we learn from our grandparents. And if our parents weren't exposed to it, or our parents think that bugs are dirty and yucky, or, a quote that I always like to share. I taught a grade 2 girl in Beijing, China, and I would always run a lunchtime club. I called it Nature Club, where it's just everything from birds to bugs to gardening. And I remember having a girl in that club, I'll never forget. She was, Mr. O'Shea, my mother says nature's dirty. And I was just like, wow, I'm glad you're in this club. Let's get to work on you, Yeah. But can we get your mom to come too? I need to talk to your mom more than you. But I mean, that's the thing, right? And the kids are taught that bugs. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I'm a fan of National Geographic education. Nat Geo Education follows me on Twitter. Thank you out there. I know you're not listening, but if you are, but all the series of those National Geographic like insect books that are called creepy crawlies. I hate the term creepy. Don't call them creepy. Grasshoppers aren't creepy. They're cool. Mantises, maybe mantises, they're fascinating. Maybe there's a bit of creepiness with those eyes. But, bugs and the nature and the worms are all to be celebrated. And it's great having people like you teaching the kids to at least not be afraid of these things. Which kind of leads me into my next question. If there's teachers out there listening to this podcast now, in the future, maybe a few years from now, listening to this as a back episode, and they would be interested in starting some kind of gardening activity or gardening club, say like a gardening club at their school, or some kind of gardening, something a little more than just a class activity. What's some advice you would give to them, or how would you sell them on starting a garden at their school?
I would start by saying it is 1,000,000% worth it. It's such a big part of our school now. And, it makes all the difference. So, first you probably have to find someone who's willing to take the lead on it, and hopefully someone who's going to be around there for a little while, but it doesn't have to be this huge thing to start with. I mean, if you really have a campus that has absolutely no space for a garden, then maybe is there a park nearby that you can start taking walks to? Or, is there a community garden in the area that you can start checking out and getting ideas from, and then, possibly bring it to your school? Yeah. If you do have a space, it can be one planter box that then the students get a chance to help build and maintain and all that. Or it can be something as huge as our campus, which is amazing. It's just, it makes all the difference for these kids. It's not only just about, boosting their science education, but some kids, in class who maybe have a lot of trouble sitting still, just can't focus. I've brought them out to the garden and said, hey, let's go for a walk or something. And then their in-classroom behavior completely changes just by going on a 10-minute walk through the garden. Yeah. So it's, oh my goodness. It's so worth it.
It really is. I mean, and that part that really speaks to me. I think about, I've always been known at every school I worked as the bug guy. So I'm a passionate armchair entomologist, maybe a bit more. My dream is to actually start my master's in entomology within the next few years, just because why not? Why not? We should always be learners, right? Lifelong learners. But I've always been that person who has loved catching bugs, collecting bugs, and especially as an adult, the passion for me really grew as in, believe it or not, in my 30s is when I hardcore got into bugs, but really kind of understanding their importance in that bigger picture. But I can remember working at a school in Japan where we had a few troubled kids that weren't my students. They were in different grades, upper grades from what I was teaching. And their teachers could not connect with them and struggled. And these were boys who were probably on a few different spectrums and they had a lot of anger and stuff going on inside. And I can remember on a few occasions, some teachers asked me, could you take this boy on a bug walk, Kevin? Like, could you just, like, on a prep time when you got some free time, And there was a few times I'd stop by, I had a prep time, I'd knock on the door and I'd be like, I'm free. And this kid would come with me and we'd walk around the campus and I'd show him like a fruit tree that was growing on campus and the aphids and the lacewings that were eating the aphids and talk about how important lacewings are and this and that. And it was neat. You know, how much of an impact that made, I'm not sure, but those few walks we did have together, I didn't see that boy that all those teachers complained about in the staff room. And I think that was because he was outdoors and he was fascinated with bugs. And I think he was the kind of kid who probably would have really done well. And I always said that like if he went to like an outdoor school or a school with a lot of outdoor learning, I'm sure this kid's behavior would have really changed in a positive way. So I really think that like what you're doing has such an important impact, especially on those kids who find that kind of traditional indoor setting really hard to handle.
Yeah, I mean, that traditional indoor setting is hard for a lot of adults to handle as well. So, yeah, so, you know, for kids, it's a lot. No matter how much recess and PE time they get, they're still they have a hard time sitting at the desk and things for that long. And so to be able to have a garden space to walk through, whether it's, you know, one planter box or an entire field to walk through, it makes such a big difference in their classroom behavior, in the way that they interact with, you know, their peers also, because, you know, in our garden, I tell the kids, this is not just my garden. This is not just your garden. This belongs to everyone here at this school and your parents and the whole community who help put effort into this. So your actions in this garden, you know, if you're eating your lunch and the wrapper flies away in the wind, that has an effect on everyone here. And so the kids really learn to take responsibility. And it changes, I see, the way that they're behaving with each other by having that experience.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think about like, I mean, I would love to see like in person a school like yours with the facilities and the gardens. And I mean, I think of, you know, I'm a Canadian and I know that a public school in Canada probably looks a lot like a public school in America. You know, you have a building with walls and a bunch of kids inside and teachers and they're learning. But I mean, I think of how many schools did I see in Canada that I even went to as a student, where literally the elementary school, it is literally a building on a massive lot that's flat with some grass and some pavement. And like, that's it. There's nothing else. Like there's nothing around it. There's no trees. There's no gardens. There's no flower beds. There's like nothing. And I think of like growing up, that's kind of like what my school was. And
that's what the school used to look like. The previous teacher gave me a wonderful photo album.
Oh, really?
And showed me that, you know, the school, it was built in, I want to say the 20s or 30s. Yeah. It was a very, very old school, and it just had a parking lot around it. And with, you know, some teachers who were really inspired to make a change and administrators who were on board with changing the school, the garden program just grew and grew. I mean, we didn't have 8 garden spaces to start with and started with just 1. And then the you know, administration just figured out like, okay, this is something that our community really, really loves and it's important to have at our school. And so they want to just continue building it.
Fantastic. Which leads me perfectly. It's a great segue into my next question. You've given you a little bit of advice to teachers. Now, what about administrators? Because, you know, we can't, as teachers, often there's not a lot we can do without the support and the blessing of our administrators. And when you have that, wonderful things can happen. When you don't, it can sometimes be, you know, it can be a push, a challenge, a marathon, sometimes banging your head against a wall even. So what would you tell school administrators out there who are listening about why they should have a garden at their school, or even better, a gardening program?
I mean, kind of the same thing. It's 1,000,000% worth it. Our school administrators have been absolutely wonderful. I have to give them a shout out. Our principal, Lauren Ashton, and our assistant principal, Henry Wong. They have been a huge part of our garden program as well. I forgot to mention, we have chickens at our school.
Oh, sweet. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so our principal and assistant principal have come down. They have gotten eggs from the chickens. We have cooked them at school and done a comparison test and, to your store-bought eggs. And it's something that everyone can enjoy. And, for administrators, I'd say check in with your community. Is this something that your community wants? Because administrators have a lot to do, absolutely, but they also have an incredible power and the power to listen to their community and make the changes in their school based off of the community's desires. And they can advocate for programs like these. And so if administrators are even considering it, I would say absolutely do it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I know you've got some big cheerleaders there in Lauren Ashton and Henry Wong. Both of them were very excited when I contacted you about this. I've actually followed Henry on Twitter for actually several years now, through however that happened. And I think he's just become a principal, hasn't he?
Yes, he is now the principal of our school.
Oh, he's a principal. Okay, Lauren has moved on. She said she had hired you, and she has moved on to another school, and Henry is now. So congratulations to both of you, Henry and Lauren. And thank you for reaching out to me, because it was really awesome, because they were so excited that they reached out to me personally to say that they were so excited that I wanted to interview you. That just really shows you've got a really supportive team. And I mean, I'm in a current situation where I'm fortunate enough to have a very supportive admin, and I have a former head of school and current head of school who are very aware of the importance of this kind of stuff. Our current head of school, our new head of school, was the principal who had hired me. He himself is a gardener and a beekeeper, and he would personally run a gardening after school activity on the roof of our former school, our former campus. That was something he did on his own after school. So I know, it's really cool. And, I have someone like him on side. We're just in a current situation where it's just, we're in the heart of a big, big city, and it's hard to find the space. But our school has just, they're in the process of opening a brand new campus. Kids will step foot on this new campus for the first time ever in a couple of weeks. And it's still a lot of construction happening, a lot of workmen, a lot of drills, a lot of drywall flying around. But I'm looking forward to seeing what can be done in that space over the next year. That'll be very cool.
Yeah, that's amazing that you have that connection with Henry. He is, I'd say, a professional tweeter. I don't know. I was not on Twitter until last year. I realized how important it is as an educator to be on Twitter. And Henry and Lauren are both fantastic at it. So I try to keep up our garden page.
Please do. And for all of those who are listening, go check out the garden page on Twitter. I'll share the links in the show notes here, on my own Twitter, on the new Facebook page, which I'm trying to grow. And a lot of people are like, oh, Twitter is not cool. It's not cool. TikTok, Insta. Yeah. But Twitter is, if you're a teacher, if you're an educator, Twitter is the space to be. And there are teachers doing amazing things in other spaces. Actually, another one I'm going to share out here, and here's one for you. I'll maybe send you a link later on. But there's one called the Native Plant Project. And this is a dude who's from the Southern United States. And he's just a very regular looking guy who knows so much about native plants in the Southern United States, and is so passionate about plants that grow on the sides of roads. And he stops his car and he gets out, and he started by doing TikTok, and now he's on Instagram, and it's called the Native Plant Project. And he'll just talk about the different plants he sees on the side of the road and how they fit into the ecosystem. And he does almost like daily reels. And he's now got 120,000 followers on Instagram. And he's really good. It's just this is so compelling. This guy is selling me, and he's just a regular looking human. He's not a model or anything like that. And he's just so passionate and knows his stuff about native plants. And it's just really neat to see that someone who's simply talking about native plants on the side of a road has more than 100,000 followers, on anything.
That's amazing. And it's such a great example of showing, you don't have to have a huge garden space to be able to observe all these plants and to be learning about them. You could literally be observing the plants that are growing in the sidewalk cracks, or, some vine that's growing on the side of someone's house. It doesn't have to be a huge space.
And that's where I see the best stuff here. For example, in a city like Shenzhen, for anyone who's ever spent any time living, working, traveling in China is, if you're in a major city, they're completely manicured and artificial. I mean, there isn't one native plant growing in the city, basically. Everything is brought in to look, everything's ornamental. And pesticides are very liberally used all over the place, sadly. But the when I see cool things, those are the things literally growing out of the cracks in the sidewalk. Or when I see somehow a seed has landed on another tree and sprouted. And now I've got like one tree growing out of a different tree. And like, I'm like, wow, look at that. It's so cool. But again, that's not my garden. That's just stuff that's around me. And, looking around in the world with that set of eyes, that kind of nature eyes, is definitely something to you can learn a lot. But, I wonder, maybe I'll have you actually share it out. Where can people see what you're doing with your garden?
The West Portal Elementary Garden Twitter page. Okay. Absolutely. By me saying that, it's also going to help hold myself accountable to keep it updated.
Please do.
It's fun. There's so many fascinating things going on in the garden every day, and it's exciting to show other people what's out there. So yeah, absolutely. That Twitter page is the best place. Or Henry.
Yeah. Henry Wong. Go follow him too. Maybe I'll throw his link in there as well. Just because it's fantastic. It's inspiration for me. I mean, that's how I came across. That's why we're talking today. It's like literally me just searching through somehow. And that's probably how it happened. It was probably Henry tweeted something at one point, and then I saw something about the garden, and then I followed the Twitter, and then it kind of, while this summer I've been talking to a lot of people because I have the flexibility to do that. And I came across it, but please keep sharing that. It's definitely inspiration for those out there who want to start gardens at their own schools. And yeah, it's great stuff. So thank you. Thank you so much, Taylor, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I could talk for hours about this stuff because it's so impactful to have outdoor education in schools. And Absolutely. I'm very grateful that you are putting this in the podcast universe for people to find out about.
Exactly. And hopefully more people will find this out, and hopefully more people will get interested in starting small projects at schools. And hopefully, I dream that there will be more schools that will find somehow they can allocate spaces in their budget to hire outdoor educators, or to even start those outdoor education programs, because now's the time. We got to do it.
Absolutely. And there's so many great resources out there too, for anybody that's even looking to get into that space. Mm-hmm. So yeah, cool. All for it.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin.
I would love to thank Taylor so much for coming on the Nature Talks podcast. That was an amazing interview, a great discussion about all the incredible things she's doing at West Portal Elementary School with her gardens. And I look forward to following that Twitter feed in the future to see all of the amazing projects that she's doing, and to get ideas, honestly, for the things that I want to do at my school here in Shenzhen. This year, I plan on doing a lot at our early years campus with trying to kind of green the interiors, teach children, not just at my grade level, but other grade levels, about insects, about growing plants and food, and hopefully encourage other educators to do the same. Now, again, Taylor's story was really fantastic. I love how she found herself in that position. And I'm going to admit, I'm jealous. I'm jelly, as they would say. I'm extremely jealous of her position. I would love to do what she does. To be a full-time garden teacher, garden educator, sustainability educator, that's something I would love to do, because, I love to spend so much time gardening with kids on my own. But, as many teachers who have a similar passion to me find themselves, like my situation, it's something that we tend to have to do as an after-school program on the weekends, again, after school hours. And, that can be pretty exhausting sometimes when you've got a full plate of curriculum, assessments, little people with you all day long. At the end of the day, sometimes you're pretty tired. And although you feel passionate about it, sometimes you have to dig pretty deep in order to get the work done that you need to in that garden space, that outdoor space. But again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Taylor. And of course, you can follow and see what's happening with her and her students at West Portal Elementary School by going onto Twitter and following the West Portal Elementary Garden at uppercase WPES GARDEN. So that's West Portal Elementary School Garden. There's going to be a link below in the show notes. So WPES Garden. WPES Garden. So follow that Twitter feed if you are on the Twitter. And if you're a teacher, there's a good chance you are on Twitter. And go check them out, see what they're doing this year. I'm going to be following. I'm going to be trying to steal as many ideas as I can because I know they're going to be doing some very creative and innovative things over in that space. And you know what? I'd love to do, maybe we can, in the future, for a future episode, we can do an update and see what's going on. All right. So now, everyone, just to wrap things up with a little bit of housekeeping, thank you all for listening to this podcast. We do have a Facebook page, Nature Talks Podcast. Please go over to facebook.com/Nature Talks Podcast, and please follow us on that Facebook page. You can follow me, Kevin, on Twitter at Mad4Maple, MADFORMAPLE, Mad for Maple, because I'm crazy for that stuff. You can follow me on Insta at Shizen Wildlife, SHIZEN Wildlife. And of course, you can find this podcast all over the place. We're on Stitcher, we're on Google Podcasts, Amazon, I think Audible, Apple Podcasts, all those great places, Spotify, Anchor. And I'm going to ask you all a couple of big favors. Help this podcast grow. If you're a teacher, you're probably on Twitter. Please share the links I share on Twitter. Please tweet this out on Twitter. Please talk to the teachers who work in the same building with you and share this podcast with them. Any teachers or people who are not, educators per se, but people who care about the environment, tell them about the Nature Talks podcast. And of course, a lot of teachers live in the Facebook ecosystem. There's so many big Facebook groups out there about education. If you're involved in any of them, I would really appreciate it if you could share this podcast in some of those Facebook groups. Share this podcast on some of those Facebook pages that you are a member of, and it will help us grow. The bigger of an audience we have, the more of an effect we have, the more people can connect with amazing educators like Taylor, the amount of the people who can connect with amazing educators like Isaac, like all those other people I've had in previous episodes and people in future episodes. So go do that stuff. And of course, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Give us a great review. We would be forever happy. All right. Well, that does it for another episode number 14 of the Nature Talks podcast. My name's Kevin O'Shea, an environmental educator, coming to you from Canada, but now I'm in China. And I was in Japan and Korea before that. I'm all over the place. And I'll be talking to you again next week. Another fantastic, inspirational person coming your way. All right, everyone. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. And keep safe.